Way back in 1925, an article appeared in the Roanoke Times about a Spanish oak tree in Accomack, Virginia that recently had fallen prey to disease and decay. But because the tree was one of only 2 cork oaks in the entire country, a tree surgeon was assigned to clean up the damage, and before long, the historic tree was looking so good that the article surmised it just might hang around for the next 100 years, standing tall till 2025. And if we pop over to the address on Google Maps, then we can see that they were right. Assuming, of course, that nothing happens to the tree in the next few weeks. Today, we're going to take a look at the year 2025, as predicted by old newspapers and magazines and books. Some of these predictions will be very simple, and some will be a little more complicated. So let's keep things moving and discuss the financial matriarchy that will soon be upon us. I found a whole ton of articles in the 1920s and 30s predicting that the vast majority of American wealth will be in the hands of women by the year 2025. The tremendous accumulation of wealth in the hands of women has reached startling figures, they said. Statisticians figure that the wealth of the country will be in feminine hands by the year 2025, because geez, they already own 41% of the individual wealth, right? Like, it's only a matter of time before they completely take over. So what exactly was supposed to be the cause of this massive transfer of wealth, right? Well, part of the thinking was that more and more women were getting involved in the workforce and, entering the stock market, but far and away, the biggest driving force behind the impending feminine financial ascendancy was that women are the beneficiaries of 80% of all life insurance policies and 70% of all the estates left behind by men when they die. So the idea was that over time, this effect would just kind of snowball and more money would be left to women, and eventually in 2025, women will have pyramided a financial oligarchy unparalleled in history. This one article from a newspaper in Atlanta even went so far as to suggest that with no money left over, men would have to return to the old bartering method of commerce, trading cows and empty gin bottles in place of legal tender. All right, this next one isn't really a prediction, but I did learn from an old newspaper article that 2025 will be the first square year since 1936. Which just means that it's the first year since 1936 with a whole number as a square root, because the square root of 1936 is 44 and the square root of 2025 is 45. Kind of cool, right? Before 1936, the last square year was 1849, which is kind of interesting to think about, because obviously right now there's nobody alive who lived in both 1849 and 1936. So as of the upload of this video, there is no one on Earth who lived through 2 square years. But there's a lot of people still around from 1936 who will live to see 2025, so this will be the first time in decades that we will again have some 2-time square year veterans. But we could have had more if a couple of scientists from 1925 had been correct in their prediction that the average lifespan would be 150 years by 2025. And of course, technology too is expected by some to accelerate way beyond what we have today. Like, here is a science fiction story from 1922 that envisions a world of personal flying machines and moving sidewalk chairs. And here we got a sketch of the 2025 New York skyline that I found in a newspaper from 1925. Those are personal airplanes flying around up there, projected to replace the automobile. And on the other side of the country, here's Los Angeles in 2025. I like how the planes in this one are still very much in the style of 1925. Like, I guess there's going to be no major air travel innovations in the next century, apparently. And one last little tidbit before we move on from technology. Here is a funny exchange that I found in a couple of old articles. Apparently, in 1925, a British professor predicted that radio waves, or wireless, would run the world by 2025. Every single facet of society would be ran on wireless. Transportation, lighting, you name it. And that idea prompted a newspaper in Cincinnati to respond by saying, okay, isn't this taking things just a little bit too far? Like, why would we want our bodies to be operated by machinery? Pretty soon, we'll be making love via wireless. And where is the fun in that? All right, moving on from tech, here is a very strange magazine article that I can only assume must have been satirical. The crossword puzzle, it says, may at first seem to be an innocent game, but could very easily become a menace if its popularity continues to grow at such an astonishing rate. Because children in 1925 are obsessed with crossword puzzles, right? And that obsession is only growing. So by 2025, I'm thinking that school will be taught via crossword puzzles. And you know, Cleopatra and George Washington and William the Conqueror, these great, important, massive historical figures, they'll all be reduced entirely down into snappy little answers to crosswords. And kids, they're going to be out there reading the dictionary and engaging with classical literature solely so that they can improve their crossword games. And they'll be studying geometry so that they can craft their own like complex puzzles out of strange shapes and designs. And great artists of the future will resign themselves only to painting puzzles and famous puzzlers. So we, the people of 1925, must unite to avoid this dismal image of the future. We must stand together and ban the nefarious crossword, because elsewise, the meaning of BC will very quickly transform from before Christ to before crosswords. All right, here's another fun one. This magazine writer is worried that people in 2025 are going to look back to 100 years in the past and assume that everybody just loved the sport of golf. So this guy is going to take it upon himself to put in writing that golf is a miserable excuse for exercise and that there is no more depressing sight than a crowd of spectators watching two great athletes completely waste their potential trying to knock a stationary ball into a tin pot. So there you go. I hope that your preconceived notions about the popularity of golf in 1925 were just shattered into pieces. This next one is another that isn't exactly a prediction, but it just kind of makes me laugh, so I'm going to include it anyway. In 1925, a girls' club at a college in Indiana held a very secretive party that was themed around predictions for the year 2025. There was no boys allowed. It's just this futuristic party for girls only, and they're going to go in there and hang out and party like it's 2025. And I like this one because imagine if those girls were just right on the money. Like 100 years ago, these college students just perfectly predicted 2025, and they're in there like hanging out in the school gym, and they're pretending to take selfies on imaginary cell phones, and they're drinking iced coffee, and they're like they're complimenting each other's drip, and they're talking about how their party is living rent-free in the heads of all the boys, and they just like completely nailed every single prediction. But we'll never know because it was a mysterious, secretive party, and probably none of the attendees are alive today to see if their predictions came true. Such a shame. Moving along, in 1950, the United States government bought 210 million eggs from American farmers in order to keep the price of eggs kind of stabilized, and then they stowed the eggs away underground to keep them cool, which prompted this journalist from Michigan to wonder how that whole event was going to shake out in the history books. You know, is little Priscilla in 2025 going to be asking why folks in Grandpa's time used to bury all their gold at Fort Knox and keep all their eggs in caves? Next, we got a journalist in 1946 remarking on the huge amount of books that have recently been published about Franklin Roosevelt. Chances are, by 2025, he says, there will be more books about FDR than there will be about Abraham Lincoln. And if we pop open Goodreads real quick, we can see that there are about 2,100 FDR books and 15,000 Lincoln books. So, unless we all really get to work in the next few weeks, this prediction just ain't gonna work out. All right, here's a pretty weird one that I found in a yearbook from 1923 for a high school in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Actually, the yearbook is from 1951. I don't know why I said 1923. The pages on all the graduating seniors have a sort of like question and answer section, and most of the questions are like the normal stuff you would expect to find in a yearbook, right? Like what's your favorite food and what's your favorite song? But then the book also asks the seniors how they think they're going to die. And one kid says that he's going to study himself to death, and a girl says that she's going to die via a nervous breakdown. And David Eller, the aspiring chemist, says that he just might blow himself up in the year 2025. So David, if by some miracle you're still out there, please, please be careful for me over these next few months. All right, so I got one last big story to share with you. But before we get there, how about we just like rapid fire burn through a whole bunch of shorter predictions? Like here's an article from 1950 about a fashion show that was sort of meant to predict the futuristic styles of the year 2025. And one of the predictions is that people in 2025 might dye their hair in bright shades of green, orange, and purple. So nice job on that one. Although I can't quite give the same compliment to these spacesuits here. This guy in 1905 thought that the population of Quebec would swell to 320 million people by 2025. This congressman predicted that the entire population of the United States would work for the federal government by 2025. And this next one is for 2026, but I'm going to include it anyway because I think it's funny. By 2026, we will have 5.2 billion people on planet Earth. And just look at this picture. That's what it's going to be like. People are going to be packed into every corner of every continent, just overflowing onto boats. Hey, if you embarked on a quest in 1931 to take every single course offered at the University of Florida, then you would not finish until the year 2025. Someone out there is about to have a real hot resume, let me tell you. Hey, by 2025, we might make it to the moon. Yippee! In 1925, it became illegal in the state of Kansas to sell cigarettes, which led this journalist to ask if bootleg coffee and tea might be on the horizon for 2025. In 1947, a recount was undertaken for a judge's election in Chicago, but apparently some people thought that the recount was taking too long. So long, in fact, that the dang thing wouldn't be finished until 2025. I don't know about you, but I am real excited to find out who won. Here we got a store called Gamble's that decided in 1960 to hold their 100th anniversary sale, despite the fact that the company had only been around for 35 years. But hey, according to them, the store might not even be around by 2025, so why not just hold the sale right now instead? And I think that was a good idea, because as far as I can tell, Gamble's does not exist anymore. This magazine writer predicts that history will smile very kindly upon Leon Trotsky, despite the fact that he is so heavily maligned in 2025. And this journalist says that because people in 1925 celebrate the old days of pirates and smugglers, people in 2025 just might craft romantic stories out of the current era of gangsters and bootleggers. That's some pretty good cultural analysis there. But all right, I think it's just about time we wrap this up and touch on our final story. A real good one, I think. In 1925, a journalist from Toronto wrote this whole big story about how silly it is that young people are looked upon with such disdain by the older generations. He says that the older crowd is constantly accusing the youth of seeking stimulation and excitement, despite the fact that old people have been saying that exact same thing basically forever. Like, the journalist says that any senior citizen should be able to remember the days of their own youth when their own generation was undoubtedly criticized for being lazy and airheaded and thoughtless and pleasure seekers with no ability to understand money and the economy. You know, like, every single generation inevitably gets old and starts levying the exact same accusations against the contemporary youth that they heard themselves. And so it's just completely ridiculous to argue that any crop of young people is somehow objectively worse than all that came before them. But as the journalist sadly recognizes, this is an uphill fight. It's simply impossible to reason with those who say that the young people of today are the worst ever. It's totally unproductive to even try to change their minds, right? Like, the journalist here is very solemnly wondering if there's even a point to writing this article. But despite their pessimism, the journalist does find solace in one possible scenario. Perhaps a century after its publication, someone might find this article by pure happenstance and quote it to the dismay of the complaining old folks of the year 2025. So maybe these lines won't be quite so futile after all. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.